Hi, my name is Steve Blank. I'm the editor and publisher of Blank Slate Media, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our sit-down with Richard Nicolello, the presiding officer of the Nassau County Legislature, who is running for re-election on the Republican line in the county legislature's 9th district. I am joined by Rob Pelez, a reporter for Blank Slate Media, and I'd like to thank Northwell Health, which is sponsoring this event and others. So let's jump right in. You've actually answered the question in writing. What I'd like to ask, which are the three major issues, and you gave the first one is making Nassau more affordable. So part of this is, and you mentioned 4 items, including sponsoring legislation to cut $100 million in county fees, parking, and real estate fees. Is that on top of what the county executive has proposed in terms of a package that I think was a $75 million cut in property taxes? Or is that in addition to?
No, that is in addition to what she is proposing in terms of property tax cuts.
Okay, so the question that was raised, and this was approved as an amendment to this year's budget on a party line vote. The Democrats abstained, saying that they could not support it unless there was a pay for. There was something, a plan for how that hole in the budget would be filled. Number one, will there be a hole in the budget if that $100 million cut takes place? And if there is a hole, how would you fill that hole?
No, we actually submitted budget amendments, and they were voted upon, in which we illustrated how the hole is going to be filled. Primarily, it will be filled by the fact that the administration is deliberately underestimating sales tax revenues for 2022. What they projected by using, basically they projected a certain percentage increase over the last 3 years. But in fact, the number that they're projecting that sales taxes will come in at in 2022 is already going to be reached in 2021. So they're in fact projecting either a no sales tax increase or a decrease in 2022, which is contrary to what our Office of Legislative Budget Review is projecting. The comptroller is projecting. If you look at growth estimates, both regionally and across the nation, you're looking at anywhere from 3.7 to 5% economic growth. So their projections are unrealistic. We put in a realistic projection of sales tax growth of 3.7% in 2022, which is easily achievable, which will probably exceed. And primarily the revenues from that will make up, for the most part, the bulk of the loss of revenues from these fees.
Now the county executive said, number one, that is not that the legislature does not have the authority to change in the budget the sales tax projection. Is she correct, or is that incorrect?
That's incorrect. As you know, I've been there since the beginning, and this is my 26th year. First time any county executive has ever made that argument was last year when this county executive made it. And she is relying upon a case out of Buffalo that involved their charter, which is different than Nassau County charter. She's also relying on a case out of Nassau Supreme Court that dealt with a different issue, and the court, by generally referencing, it's called dicta, that issue. There is, however, a second department case, which is in this appellate division, that basically holds that we have the ability to change sales tax revenues. Let me tell you why that's important. Last year, the administration projected a 20% decrease in sales taxes for 2021. In fact, we've gone up substantially in 2021, contrary to that projection of 20% decrease, to the tune of over $300 million. So when they make those projections and they're so unrealistic, what happens is we are overtaxing our residents, New York property taxes, because we are underestimating how much sales taxes are coming in. So no, the executive is wrong on this. It basically, if she was right, she would almost seize complete control over the county's budget. It would be, the legislature would have almost nothing to say about it.
So we're looking at the budget. So Nassau County has had difficulty. It's been under supervision of the state authority since the year 2000 because the county needed state assistance to make its ends meet around the year 2000. And it's had difficulties balancing the budget ever since. So in fact, that's how the $100 million in county fees got established. I think in 2012, there was a hole of about $100 million that was filled by these fees on parking and red light cameras and real estate fees. So would we not be better? It's not as if, taxpayers or residents here don't have a lot of history of being confident that projections from the county are accurate, because year after year they seem to have fallen through. Now there's kind of a difference on whether or not how much it'll have that it's over. Wouldn't it be prudent to be on the safe side and say, okay, let's go with the projections. If we're already cutting property taxes this year. If we have that good a year, then let's wait till next year, instead of having a situation where if the numbers don't come up, then again, now you're filling a hole again.
Actually, it's the opposite. I think by continuing to rely on these fees for revenues, it's not only imprudent, it's irresponsible budgeting, and here's why. In March of 2020, a Nassau County Supreme Court judge ruled that this tax map verification fee was illegal and unconstitutional. Why? Because a county person can check someone's section, block, and lot in a matter of seconds. And that was all that's done for this fee. So the county is charging $350 for this fee that just involves checking someone's section, block, and lot. It takes seconds. There has to be a connection between a fee, unlike taxes, there has to be a connection between a fee and the services being rendered. And the judge said, you can't do that. It's unconstitutional. Now the county is appealing that. It's up before the appellate division. But the likelihood of us prevailing is limited. So we should not be relying on this. And B, by continuing to collect these fees, not only are you putting burdens on people doing real estate transactions, you're risking the possibility that 2 years down the road, when the appellate division inevitably upholds what that lower court did, the court's may find, hey, you have to pay that back. So we could be in a position 2 years from now of refunding, we meaning the county taxpayers, hundreds of millions of dollars. So these fees, from a governmental budgetary standpoint, should not be relied upon.
Okay, they can go back to 2012 when those fees were applied.
It's possible. It's possible they could go back in time. I mean, the truth of the matter is they were increased over several times, 2012 and 2015. One of them, the mortgage recording tax was recording fee, was increased several times. It went from $25 and now it's above $300. So, I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you pay off your mortgage, what's happening is, if you pay off your mortgage, you have to file these documents at the county, and it's costing hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to file a satisfaction of mortgage. So you have seniors and others who are simply putting that document aside to save the money because they don't want to spend it, and putting themselves in danger of not having that satisfaction around it. And so it's just not good for our taxpayers, our residents.
Okay, you also mentioned that you fought against the county executive's reassessment plan, which resulted in tax increases for 2/3 of Nassau's residents. Isn't the reason now? Let's go back to the reassessment. There hadn't been a reassessment in 10 years. County executive did that. The people who are finding, who are having that 2/3 of Nassau who are being increased, based on the reassessment, were underpaying their taxes for up to 8-10 years, and that other 1/3, not included in the number, were overpaying their taxes. They were making up for those, and those tended to be the people who were underpaying, had challenged their assessments. Those who are overpaying didn't. So do you think that now that the assessment system now, or the assessments, are more accurate now than they were before the reassessment?
I think you'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, but I would mention this, that we understood that the values needed to be changed, and that they were incorrect, and they had developed a situation where it was gross unfairness. So we in the Rules Committee of the Legislature voted not once but twice to retain contractors to do the reassessment. I think our problem has been the manner in which they've gone about it. The lack of transparency, the reliance on these formulas that they couldn't explain and refused to provide to people. So I think we're at a situation where that some of our residents are currently paying too much in taxes because their assessed values are wrong because of the way this Department of Assessment is being run. So yes, there were problems in the past, and yes, they needed to be corrected. But we're getting back into the same situation. Those problems were caused by a freeze in assessments, which is what the Department of Assessment is doing, and by a shift in the values based on challenges. We are back to mass settlement. So we're heading back to where we were, number one. Number two, again, we've identified properties in which, these $1 million homes are paying next to nothing in tax. So
are you saying that right now, because there was the county executives talking about state findings, and there's professional organizations that have said that Nassau County is, apparently there is a range of being wrong on property tax assessment, but that the county right now falls well within the acceptable range, where previously it was well out of it. Are you saying that's not correct?
Well, I mean, I've seen that. Obviously, Newsday reported on that. However, I mean, what we are hearing from our residents is far from substantiating that. And again, what we are seeing in terms of the values on blocks in communities that we are finding are not accurate at all. And again, I mentioned the one case in which they had properties, or several cases, properties, $1 million homes that are paying next to nothing in taxes. So
but that's anecdotal. Do you think, I mean, the state has said that has been within the acceptable range, and people can still challenge if they are being, if they think that the county is wrong, they can still challenge that. But do you think that the county is what the assessment system now is more accurate than it was 3 years ago?
I would say that in general, because it was so bad 3 years ago, that it may be more accurate now, but is it acceptable from our residents? Absolutely not. And again, you look at people whose school taxes arrived, and they're supposed to be going down with their new assessed values, and they're seeing increases. So, I mean, I believe that the Department of Assessment, because they're not responsive and because they were protecting this proprietary information, I believe that there's been a gross failure. And I think these values need to be corrected. And we need to go back in, take a look at the values and bring them up to where they should be.
Wouldn't that happen when people challenge their taxes?
Well,
That's what was relied on. Now, there was Ed Mangano, a Republican, was the county executive for 8 years. The legislature was in the hands of Republicans. It had no certified county assessor. No reassessment was done. Why should not people be leery of the Republicans in the legislature talking about reassessment when for 8 years it was allowed to get that out of whack?
We have no certified assessor right now. The county executive has appointed Robin Laveman, who has no assessment experience. She's taking classes right now, but she has failed the test given out by the New York State Assessors Association. So we don't have a certified assessor right now. Secondly, she has frozen real estate taxes assessments. She is doing mass settlements, which is exactly what Mangano did. So if you want to point back to Mangano, this county executive, after spending all that time on new assessed values, is doing the exact same thing. There is a mass settlement program in effect right now. And I'll tell you, I'll say this to you and to the residents out there. If you think your assessed values are correct now, then you could support the county executive. If you're looking at your assessed values and looking at your school tax bills and you've got tax sticker shock, then I would support the Republicans in this election.
Well, those who did, that would be a good formula for you, because 2/3 are paying more because according to the reassessment, they were underpaid. They underpaid their taxes over that period. So who wouldn't want that? What should be the formula going forward? Should there be should there be yearly reassessments?
The
property, should it be done? I'm sure there are computer models. Should all the property, real estate and commercial, be reassessed on a yearly basis?
Okay, first things off, I think we should have an elected assessor, number one, who's responsible to the people. Secondly, the county executive and the assessment process, reassessment, intended to do annual reassessment updates by doing the modeling, by doing all that work. They stopped that in the second year. So they went to trending. So basically, they looked at community-wide and said, well, the community-wide, say Long Beach, went up, property values went up 2.5%, and applied that to every property. Third year, which is not modeling, which is not drilling down and looking at each property and figuring out what it's worth. The third year, they froze assessment values. So yes, we should go back, get the values correct. We should be updating this information by modeling and doing the correct work, which the administration has now stopped doing.
Okay. Okay, and let's talk about when we're talking about the budget and the reassessment, I also wanted to talk to NIFA about NIFA. So in 2020, the budget was balanced on the basis, in part, of a refinancing of bonds using NIFA's bond rating, which was better than NASA, and I think it was supposed to save $350 million over 2 years. At the time, the head of NIFA, the chair of NIFA, and some other members said this was still not sufficient, that the county did not have a plan, has never had a plan since it started in 20 years to rein in spending and to address revenue, to get into a better long-term position. This year, there's been kind of a boost. I mean, obviously with COVID and then the relief funds provided by the federal government, we're in a unusual situation going forward, but the federal money will be ending presumably in the not too distant future. What about the criticism from NIFA that you both got it wrong, that this has been a county, Republican and Democrat, that has failed to develop a plan? Now, the county executive says she has a plan and it'll be balanced and that she's going to have property tax cuts. But what do you make of the criticism just a year ago saying that Nassau County did not have a plan for addressing expenses and revenue?
Well, like every bureaucratic institution, once you establish something, they sort of perpetuate themselves. And in my opinion, that's what NIFA is doing at this point. And I want to go back to what you mentioned before about refinancing. We did take advantage of NIFA's better credit rating, and we did refinance the entirety of the county debt. We did so because NIFA essentially had a gun to the head of the county taxpayer legislators, county executives saying, if you don't do this, we will essentially declare an austerity budget and make some very difficult decisions. So we didn't want to cut services. We didn't want them raising taxes. So we said, we'll agree to it. That was based on the projection of the administration that sales taxes would decrease 20% in 2021. It didn't. They were wrong by 300 million. So we now have refinanced the county's debt, extended NIFA's existence into 2040. And in 2 or 3 years, when the debt service starts to increase, this county is going to be faced with a dilemma similar to what we were back when NIFA was formed. So in my opinion, NIFA is part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Okay. Let's talk about one of the things that's going to happen this year, this legislature, with the election, is the redrawing of legislative lines. This happens every 10 years with the census. In 2010, it actually took the county until 2014 to draw the lines because of disputes, objections, lawsuits, a bunch of acrimony. And at the end of it, a legislature, a majority Republican that had a 10-9 edge, drew lines that gave 12 districts where the majority, which had more registered Republicans than Democrats. Some of these district lines, including your own district, are meander for long distances around. So the Democrats when the redistricting was done, it was a 12-7 advantage. Josh Lapizan won as an independent. He caucuses with the Democrats. It's now 11-8. In that time, the Democrats have increased their advantage, but to almost 100,000 registered. The number of blanks, no pun intended here, but people who are not registered has grown. Republicans have stayed about the same. And according to the census, the minority population of Nassau has grown to about 42%. So the Democrats came up with an idea of nonpartisan redistricting. You have, at least in the past, been against that. If the Republicans win these races now, this election coming up in November, or win an advantage, how will you redistrict the county? Will it be a nonpartisan process? And if not, then what will be the metrics for deciding how to draw the lines?
Well, first of all, the current process for drawing the lines was part of the charter revision, which was put before the voters in the early 1990s, was approved by the voters. Secondly, I have been looking at your editorials, and your last editorial was factually incorrect. There are not 2 minority legislators. There are 3 minority legislators currently representing the county, legislators Abrahams, Bino, and Salages. and has been that way for a decade. Before Legislator Salaz was elected, Legislator Ciotti, who was a Republican representative of the district, was a minority district for many years, and he was reelected because he was good at what he did, providing services. With respect to the enrollment edges do not elect legislators, voters do. And the breakdown of the legislative lines and the numbers in the legislature has been reflective of how many voters have came out and the results of those elections, almost exactly. Now, our majority has 11 members. Now, one of those members is a Democrat who runs in a Democrat district, Denise Ford. She caucused with us. So when you talk about 11, it's actually 10 Republicans in the legislature. Another member, Bill Gaylor, runs in a district with a large Democratic edge. He still wins. There is a Democrat, as you mentioned before, he calls himself an independent, who runs and wins in a Republican district. So the point that, well, enrollment is so high that therefore it should reflect something else is based on, it's not factual. Now, there are constitutional rules for drawing these lines. You cannot just arbitrarily draw them. You have to recognize and draw districts that protect minority areas. You can't break them up. You can't pack them into other districts. You have to recognize village, town, and town lines as much as possible when drawing the lines. And the lines that were drawn a decade ago actually did a much better job than the Democrats did 20 years ago. The districts have to be of similar size. I would also point out that the so-called nonpartisan commissions are not working. For example, in Virginia, their nonpartisan commission broke down because Republicans and Democrats couldn't agree. In New York, just recently, the nonpartisan commission broke down because Republicans and Democrats passed their own maps. So nonpartisan commissions, which are touted as something that's going to be an improvement, are not. In fact, they're as political as the process that's been followed in this country for 200 years. And then lastly, the only point I would make is that your editorials in your paper has focused almost exclusively on the Nassau legislature. The New York State legislature, it has supermajorities of Democrats in the House, the Assembly, and the Senate. And what you're getting out of New York is a radical left policies. Now, that is a much greater problem for this county than any local legislative body. So, I mean, I quite frankly don't understand what the emphasis is on the Nassau County legislature. What you should be writing about is the New York State legislature and the future of Long Island, because if that continues, we as a region are going to suffer. Whether or not there's Republicans in charge of Nassau or Republicans in charge of Suffolk or vice versa, it's not really going to make all that much difference in the long run. But unless we get control of this New York State legislature and have some sort of balance there, there's going to be tremendous downside for this county and threats to our future.
Well, there's been a discussion. I mean, number one, and we have discussed the fact that New York right now, they're threatening to override, the supermajority is threatening to override the nonpartisan system. And we pointed out to the idea of gerrymandering in favor of the Democrats. Supposedly, with the Democratic leadership in Washington responding to what's taking place nationally in terms of gerrymandering of districts. And this is seen as on many states have attempted to address the gerrymandering, the extreme gerrymandering that's tended to get make the legislatures and Congress having non-competitive seats, which has basically made them more, made possible the election of legislators who are more extreme. So this is not just a New York State thing. New York State did do it. 2 legislatures with Republicans did attempt a nonpartisan redistricting system. So this is not just something that is, we're talking about Nassau County, this is a national issue. My question is, if you're not going to, if this is going to be up to the legislature, now it's a little bit different because last time in 2014, there was a Republican county executive. This time there's a Democratic one. This is a law that gets passed. The county executive can veto it. But just going into this, what will then be the system? If you don't like nonpartisan, how is it going to be set up? And right now we have many districts. Your district, Roslyn has 4 county legislators. One of them starts at the Suffolk line and ends up in Roslyn. Another one starts, that's your district, at the Queens line and goes through Roslyn. And there are 2 others. Is there a commitment to representing, if not political numbers, then at least geographic ones where communities like, I think there are a number of places. Hicksville is another one where there are 4 legislators in Hicksville. Does that make sense? Should geographic integrity be an objective of a redistricting?
Not only is it, it has to be. There's a requirement that you respect as much as possible town and village lines. And one of the reasons my district changed is that they put my district wholly within the town of North Hempstead. Now, the problem overall with respect to that is that with the way Nassau County has developed, there are lines that for school districts, for special districts, for fire districts, for villages that intersect one another. For example, there's a part of New Hyde Park that goes to the Great Neck School District. There's a part of New Hyde Park that goes to New Hyde Park Schools. There's a part that goes to the Elmont School District. There's parts that are in the New Hyde Park Fire District. There's parts that are in the Garden City Park Fire District. So it's not, because of the way the county is situated, it's not ideal. But I'll tell you, I mean, you mentioned Roslyn, that split up, and obviously it's something you want to avoid, but Manhasset by and large now is in one legislative district. If you look at the town of North Hempstead town council maps, Manhasset is arbitrarily split into 2 town council districts. So we actually did a much better job, again, both on the town level. If you look at North Hempstead, if you look at the prior map developed by the Democrats, we did a better job, and we would be focused on doing something similar to keeping keeping villages, towns, communities intact. But as you mentioned, if there is a split government, whether it's Democrats legislature and the Republican county executive or vice versa, it will the plan will have to be approved by the county executive, and if not, it will either be negotiated or we'll go to court, or we'll wind up in the courts most likely.
Okay, let me ask you this. You mentioned state government politics, so let me ask you. You're saying that a radical left state government, state legislature, is a threat to Long Island. So can you give us some examples?
Best example of that is Cashless Bail. We've all heard of the difficulties in terms of what that's caused in terms of law enforcement, but basically you're letting individuals, burglars, in some cases drug dealers, immediately out of jail without serving time, without bail, with no requirement that they come back. So that's a major problem. But the second part of that was equally extreme was they enforced these disclosure laws so that the district attorney now has to turn over to the defense counsel every bit of information they've collected, and it has to be done in a very quick time period. So for example, if you fail to provide the name of the key witness or the information for the key witness, or if you fail to provide the blotter entry that says the police car was dispatched at 2:21, in either case, you could potentially get a case dismissed because of that. These new disclosure laws require that you provide the names of witnesses, their contact information, the telephone numbers. What that does, especially in terms of hate crimes, is it discourages people from coming forward. So, I mean, there's other examples, but that is the prime example. That legislation is a function of 2 things. One is a far left government in New York State, and secondly, our state legislators in Nassau County not doing the right thing and voting against that.
So that had actually been a vote on the budget. It was folded into the state budget of that year. Now, there were changes made. There were objections. County Executive Curran objected to it, as did Madeline Singas when the legislation, and there were subsequent revisions, a series of revisions that took place 4 or 5 months later. Do you think now the objection to the bail system in New York, which was one of the most restrictive nationally, basically caused many people for nonviolent crimes to stay in jail simply because they were poor? And these are not the people that we're talking about and that are subject to bail are people who have been arrested, but they're not proven guilty. But people who had money, who had greater means, were able to come up with bail. Those who weren't ended up staying in jail because they couldn't afford it. Do you think that we should eliminate the legislation completely that was made to address that issue and start all over? Or do you think that the current legislation in its amended form should be revised?
I think they should eliminate the legislation completely and start from fresh. Obviously, someone who commits shoplifting or a crime like that and doesn't have the means to pay bail should not be languishing in the Nassau County Correctional Facility. That's just a matter of equity. And I don't think any reasonable person would want that to happen. So that should be that should not be the case. And those people should not be held in bail because they can't afford a minimum amount of held in jail because they can't afford a minimum amount of bail. On the other hand, if someone is dealing drugs in your community, you don't want them let back out on the streets so they can continue to deal drugs, in the schoolyards.
But they made amendments. Did they not? Are you saying that there are still classes of crimes and that there's a lack of judicial discretion for these class of crimes currently?
Exactly, and I'll give you another example. Let's move away from drugs. A real life example, which we've had a spate of break-ins and burglaries in homes throughout the North Shore. They were able to track down the burglars for the great work of the police department. It was a gang of 5 Chilean nationals who were brought in for that very purpose. They were charged with burglaries, and because the judge had no discretion whatsoever, they were released. So what happened to the Chileans? Well, they were told, number one, to go across the street and get a leg monitors, and they never did that. They hopped on a train, went to Mexico, and flew back to Chile. So, I mean, the system that does that is chronically, fundamentally flawed. So, I mean, the fact that the state legislature thought that would be a good idea to put that in place just shows you how out of touch and extreme.
But let me ask you this. This is a question. Maybe that person shouldn't get out. What if the person had the money for bail? Should there be bail? Should cash be the basis? Shouldn't it be the judge's decision of whether or not this is a person who is a concern, may not show up, may commit a crime? Shouldn't that be hands in the judge?
Yes.
And not a matter of I'm more affluent, I commit a crime, now I get to go out because I've got the money for bail and will show up, where somebody who is poor, who's about to lose his job because he's not going to show up on Monday for the job that he had, and now he's out of work and he's not been proven guilty of a crime, he's been accused of it, but he's going to lose his job, maybe he loses his house, maybe he loses his family, simply because he cannot come up with the money for bail. Shouldn't that be eliminated and simply let the judge say, hey, that person is dangerous. That person is a threat and we shouldn't really, regardless of how much money they have.
That is the essence of the flaw in the legislation. It takes away the discretion of the judges. Of course, the judge should have that discretion to set bail. And again, in terms of somebody who's a flight risk, to do what they have to do to keep that person. The legislation took that away. I mean, that's fundamentally what the problem is. So we should go back to a situation where the judges have the discretion to do what they need to do, to recognize someone's ability to pay, to someone's flight risk, the severity of the crime, weigh that in and determine what they need to do to keep these people and make sure they come back and stand trial for whatever it is they're accused of.
Okay. Are you saying, I'm curious, I've asked this question in my editorials and elsewhere. are you seeing in the tenor of races, Josh Lapizan has an opponent that has been putting out mailers that are pretty extreme, calling him a Marxist, critical race theory, and a bunch of other things. Do you think that the divisiveness at the national level and the anger at the national level, do you see that now in Nassau County?
No, I would mention that the Democrats in Denise Ford's district and Bill Gaylord's district are accusing the sitting legislators of being, extremist on the level of, some of the great dictators of all time. But so I mean that stuff, that type of messaging does go on. But in terms of the legislature itself, I have not seen the acrimony, the vindictiveness and the divisiveness of what's happened in Washington here at the Nassau County Legislature. I think it's still civil. I think we still get along, not just among legislators, but among elected officials in general. That doesn't really exist.
Quick question, because many Republicans, and this is your Republican, and there's been kind of fault lines have been drawn among some Republicans on the issue of former President Trump. Do you think that Joe Biden was elected in a free and fair election?
I mean, of course, Joe Biden was elected. The processes are what they are. The Trump campaign had the ability to challenge those processes in court and failed. So, of course, Joe Biden was elected. Does that mean we shouldn't look at the voting processes to make sure that there isn't the potential for fraud, or if there aren't logistical issues that need to be addressed? We should after every election. But the question is whether Biden was elected. Yes, the electors met. They voted for him. He is the duly elected president of the United States.
All right. There is a large percentage of Republicans who disagree, and at least at the national level, there are not many that will say what you just said on national television. So, you may say, of course, but it's not, to have someone say it like in your position is not necessarily that uncommon.
I mean, the truth of the matter is
that common.
Stacey Abrams has been running around the country for the last 3 years claiming she's the governor of Atlanta, saying the election was stolen from her and she was duly elected. In fact, the Trump election was a lot closer. So, yeah, I mean, so there are some that say election was stolen by Trump, but you've got a prominent Democrat who's running around the country saying the exact same thing about itself. So, I mean, there should be a little bit of equity about that.
Okay. In terms of the other things, in terms of now, are there areas where you think, in terms of how the county could increase sales tax, increase other revenues, and cut expenses? Are there things in the budget? We've been looking at this since 1996. This is something that we've done some town halls, and people have said there's a lot of opportunities out there. There was a study done by NIFA in 2010, and we had on one of the authors, and they said they had all these ideas, cut expenses, raise revenue, and they were all ignored. Do you think there are ways that the county can reduce expenses or bring in revenues?
Yes. I mean, just a couple of things I would mention. One is that I mentioned before about the administration's 20% decrease in sales tax projection for 2021. We forced the administration, when we were doing that massive borrowing, to create a special fund. So basically, all of the monies beyond what their projection was for the 2021 budget is in a special fund right now. So that fund is going to total probably $350 million by the end of the year when all the accounting is done. The primary purpose of that fund is to pay tax refunds. So the county has had a backlog of tax refunds for as long as I know, in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So finally, with that fund in place and other measures, we will be able to pay back businesses, small businesses, residents who have been owed money for the county for years. So governmentally, it helps the county, but it puts more money into the economy, number one, and number two. In terms of cutting, in our budget amendments, we cut out $1 million of patronage. The county executive has 7 public relations officials, for want of a better word, communications people, tucked into community affairs. I mean, I don't even think the president of the United States has 7 public, PR people working for him directly. So our budget amendments took that out. So I mean, that's the type of thing that infuriates people when you can't get somebody to answer the phone in assessment, or you can't get a application for a contractor's permit renewed because the consumer affairs is a mess. And meanwhile, there's public relations people being stacked upon each other. That type of thing has to end.
How do you address, you do have a county executive. The budget's not only balanced, but you guys your differences are how much we can cut in terms of fees and property taxes. The county, notwithstanding your concerns about safety, has been voted the most safe county in New York State and the second of its size in the United States. So it sounds as if there was a reassessment that at least some believe that is much fairer, or at least there was a reassessment. So it sounds like the county is doing pretty well. Doesn't that argue in favor? I mean, these are some notable achievements, particularly in the budget area, in terms of how the county is doing. Do you disagree that the idea is that the county is better off now than it was before Laura Curran took office?
I think it comes down to our residents if they would agree with that, especially their personal circumstance, and I think a majority would say no. But here's the thing: I mean, what's changed is the sales taxes have done well, which is not really a function of anything that administration has done. We've had a massive infusion of federal dollars. I mean, we've $200 million this year, $200 million next year. Last year we had $100 million, which enabled them to balance the budget. As I said, NIFA forced a refinancing of the county debt, which saved money in short term, is going to cost us money down the road. So yes, we're in better shape now. But I mean, I read the Newsday editorial endorsing the county executive and saying what a great job it did, but there was no specific, what exactly did she do that was great? So and here's my concern about, I agree with you actually with crime. We are in good shape. But my concern is that that's a constant battle. And we've seen policies such as New York City, where they changed the way policing is done, where it led to a spike in crime. So the issue there is, yes, we're in good shape. Do we stay there? Do we continue these policies, or do we go in the direction of other municipalities which have had negative results? And that's, that is a deep concern of people. They look at their TVs, they see what's happening in Chicago and in New York City, and they're worried. These attacks on police have people concerned.
Let's talk about downtown. A lot of the downtown business districts were already facing difficulties prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic has certainly exacerbated that greatly. What do you see as of how you would want to address the problems in the downtowns?
Steve, I think it is a massive problem, and it's getting worse. I think, I think with with Amazon and the continuing shift. I mean, even our malls are looking, are struggling now. But if you look at our downtowns, there are a tremendous number of stores that are out and, you know, and struggling, and there isn't the diversity that we need. But, you know, I mean, we had that forum, and there's a number of different ideas as to encourage, from the county perspective, encourage, you know, more growth in our downtowns. I mean, there's infrastructure that you could address. There's sales tax issues that I think that perhaps from the county's perspective, again, perhaps give some sort of sales tax relief, especially in the area of clothing and things of that nature. So, I mean, there's a number of things that can be done, but it is a major issue for our county going forward.
Transit-oriented mixed-use development. This is something that has been promoted in villages and towns across Nassau, run by Republicans, run by Democrats. Mineola in your district is a prime example. Right. The idea of having retail on the ground floor and apartments above near transit. The difficulty that we've heard from many developers is most places aren't zoned. Now, this is not a county issue. Right. This is a town and village issue. But most places, the zoning doesn't permit it, so that if someone does want to try it, they have to go through a variance, which is a whole additional process that creates uncertainty. So what they end up doing is they just avoid it. It is an added expense of doing business in places in Nassau County. Manhasset has been mentioned as one, Roslyn another, where developers say, I don't want to go through that process. I could end up losing, having invested a lot of money, when I could be going work some other place. I can go to Queens, where they don't have these laws. Again, it's not something you could do, but what would you encourage?
I think you have to look at each community individually and see what fits within those communities. I mean, I'm a firm believer.
But would you do that? Would you encourage people to have a plan rather than let this be a case-by-case basis? This is the answer. This is always case-by-case basis. Wouldn't it be better to bring in, to attract developers to say, let's look at it in advance. We're either going to say yes or we're going to say no based on this is where the place is located. And if someone wants to come, once we've rezoned it that way, they can do it. They don't have to, but they can.
Yes, I mean, but I think the key there is bringing the community in at the outset of making those, you know, establishing that zoning plan. The community, meaning the residents as well as the business owners, because I mean, New Hyde Park had an issue that they had developed what they wanted to, potentially a idea for transit-oriented development. And the people were not brought into the process until later on, and they objected to it, and it sunk. So you really need to involve the community, make them stakeholders as soon as possible, understand what the concerns are, and I think you could accomplish much. I mean, the truth of the matter is, a place like Mineola is not going to fit everywhere. The development there fit in Mineola because of unique circumstances of how the community is, the village is configured, but it would not fit in every community. So it might work there, something else might work differently in another community. I just want to go back for 1 second to the prior question. One of the issues, and you brought up Manhasset, which is what triggered this, with downtown development, is the delays in the building departments, and it's particularly in North Hempstead. It takes months and months and months to get a permit. It takes months and months and months to get a C of O. And if we can streamline those, that process and get those permits and get the work done as soon as possible, and get these people trying to establish businesses into the spaces as soon as possible, I think that'll help downtowns also. I mean, we were both at the function in Manhasset with the Chamber of Commerce, and there was the one business owner. She's since opened. It's a beautiful business, but it took her forever to get approvals to get that done.
Right. There's also the issue of fire marshals being part of it for restaurants, and the county has had a shortage of fire marshals. So part of the delay is with Nassau County. Where are we with, in terms of, County Executive Curran says there's more money in the budget for the hiring of more fire marshals. Is there enough money? Is this being addressed? is the county part of the problem being addressed?
Traditionally, it has been, and there was those shortages, but there was additional revenues, and they have been making hirings. The new fire marshal is actually the deputy mayor of Mineola, Mike Utaro, who's been outstanding in terms of understanding the issues, resolving issues, and getting things done for, in a safe way for our businesses. So I think there's been an improvement from the fire marshal standpoint.
All right, this is where I give the candidate the opportunity to say why he is a better candidate. But once again, it seems that perhaps you're fortunate that your opponent has not been running, but I'll let you make the case for your leadership and why the Republican legislature ought to keep its majority going forward with your election pretty much not in too much danger.
Well, I think the major benefit of the Republican majority is that we have kept our focus on the residents, on taxes, on providing relief to those who are financially distressed. We've kept our focus on making sure that the police are funded completely. At the same time, we adopted a police reform plan that's reasonable. We've supported things such as uniform cameras for our police, which gives a level of, I think it benefits the county tremendously. It gives a level to our residents of assurance to our residents that's important. So, I mean, I think, and I can only speak for the Republican majority because I work closely with them, obviously, but during the pandemic, I mean, it really showed what legislators are supposed to do. Because all of our offices were fielding calls, helping senior citizens get vaccines, getting equipment to our restaurants. And, so it was, again, we do that, we do constituent work year round. But that time in particular, I think, whatever they envision with the county legislature, I think that during the height of the pandemic is when the vision of the legislature was fully realized in terms of providing services to our residents. But I think mostly it's focusing on the taxes and crime. We've had a Democratic county executive, and we've provided the traditional role of being a check and a balance of the loyal opposition. And our government is supposed to be built on checks and balances. It is built. That's what the founders created. So I think we've fulfilled that role. We've worked when we needed to, and we've at every step of the way we saw things going wrong. We've challenged them.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Presiding Officer Richard Nicolello for taking the time with us, and those who attended. I'd like to again thank Northwell Health for sponsoring today's discussion. For those who are unable to watch today, a recording of our discussion can be found on Blank Slate Media's website, The Island Now, our Facebook page, and our YouTube channel. A story about this afternoon's event discussion will appear in our 6 newspapers. And I'd like to, if you're not already, we hope that you will support local journalism by subscribing to the newspaper of your community. You can also do that on our website, The Island Now. Again, I'd like to thank Rob Pelez. Rob broke his ankle last night, and he is still on the job doing it. So there's a level of dedication that we like to see. We'd like to thank our presiding officer, again, for taking the time and having this discussion with us.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks, Rich.
Okay.